Today's scripture reading is from Jeremiah 1, verses 4 to 10 and 17 to 19. The word of the Lord came to me saying, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord," I said, "I do not know how to speak. I am too young." But the Lord said to me, "Do not say, 'I am too young.' You must go to everyone I send you to, and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord." Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, "I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Get yourself ready, stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. Today I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar and a bronze wall to stand against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord." This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today and for the month of June, actually. A few months ago, when Winston was preparing for the summer, he's like, "Hey, guess who I got for the month of June?" And I was like, "NT Wright." And he's like, "No." And he's like, a little closer, and no, just as amazing, if not more amazing. He's like, "No, I got one of your old professors." And I said, "Oh, Jesse's committed for an entire month." And he's like, "No, I called Gareth." And I was like, "Oh, awesome." So real long story short, if I have been any good with you at all as a pastor, that is in part because of Gareth. He was one of my professors at CBC. He taught me a few spiritual formation classes and Anabaptist history and thought, which was a game changer. In 2018, I was halfway through my degree. I was still a little bit like, I'm starting to get it, but I don't really get the Mennonite thing still. After taking his class, I was like, okay, I'm on board. Sign me up. So I owe a lot to this man, his continued mentorship, and just his wealth of wisdom and knowledge. He's a gift to me, to our church, and to MCBC as a whole. So give a warm welcome for Gareth.
Thanks, Justin. Yes, I'm always excited when former students join my denomination. It's like, this was a big coup. But honestly, I was never out to convert students over to the dark side. But here we are. I am delighted to be a partner with Justin and numerous other students, former students from the college where I was employed. The reason I could say yes to 4 Sundays in a row is because I'm unemployed, whereas Jesse is employed. So I'm happy to be here. I would ask for your prayers, though. I am helping out more with our congregation, which is Emmanuel Mennonite Church. Our pastor, Rod Suderman, is receiving cancer treatments, and so a few of us are stepping in to help out while he is recovering from the treatments. So keep him and our congregation in your prayers. I want to do Jeremiah in June. And you may be wondering, what's wrong with this fellow? I do want to, it's a big book, so we won't be doing kind of a systematic exegetical study through the book, but I will want to pick up 4 themes from the prophet Jeremiah on vocation, prayer, land, and hope. Looking at some of the big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is God like? How do we relate to God? Where are we and why does it matter? And so on. And you're thinking, okay, this seems a little heavy and serious for the month of June, the first month of summer, and so on. It asks some deep and heavy theological questions. But then I think, why not? Perhaps I wanted to make sure I didn't preach on something that you had heard before recently, so I thought there's very few sermons on Jeremiah, so I'm not going to be at least doing a repetition. And it does raise some important questions, even if they are complicated. I love Jeremiah's poetry and Jeremiah's passion, and I hope that you will also. The reason why books and movies like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter are so popular is because they tell universal truths about human life. And they're illustrative of our topic today. "I am not made for perilous quests," cried Frodo. "I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen?" "Such questions cannot be answered," said Gandalf. "You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, nor for power or wisdom in any way. But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use strength and heart and wits as you have." Frodo Baggins was chosen for a special task that he felt unprepared and unqualified for. He didn't even really understand who he was or what his gifts were. This is not unlike the call to Jeremiah we read about in Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah was born in a volatile time in Israelite history. Reform was the word of the day, but the reforms were not strong enough to prevent the takeover of his small country of Judah by a powerful neighbor, Babylon. When Jeremiah was probably elementary school age, another kid, a few years older, named Josiah, became king at the ripe old age of 8. I don't see any 8-year-olds in the audience here. But 8-year-olds aren't becoming king every day unless your last name is Windsor. But sorry, the Windsors seem to be living a long time, so it's probably not going to be happening anytime soon. It seems that young people had some big responsibilities in those days. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 2 says that Jeremiah got his first vision in King Josiah's 13th year. That would make Jeremiah probably in his late teens. There had been nothing particularly spectacular in Jeremiah's life up until this point. He was an ordinary preacher's kid from the small town of Anathoth. Now, chapter 1 is probably not a literal conversation between Yahweh and Jeremiah. It may have been a liturgical piece common to most priests and prophets over the generations, but the point remains the same. It begins in verse 4, where Jeremiah is given some profound words from God. "I have created you with great care inside your mother's womb, and I have planned who you would be even before you were born. I have chosen you to be uniquely you. I have a special plan for you. What an affirming message to hear. This message to Jeremiah is the message also to each one of us. It reminds me of Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God doesn't make junk. Each one of us is made in the image of our Creator. God has a special plan for each of our lives. What an affirming message to hear. But it is this special plan that has Jeremiah a bit worried. Imagine, let's put this into a modern day context. You're feeling pretty good about graduating from high school and being out on your own, and God calls you not to beach ministry or even university, not even to be a coffee barista at Starbucks, but to be a professional lobbyist against the government and a critic of the religious establishment, a prophet to the nations. Well, that's exactly what happened to Jeremiah. Continue to imagine Jeremiah. Whoa, Yahweh, I think you might have the wrong guy. I barely passed speech class. I'm nervous in front of groups. I'm not really familiar with politics. I'm too young. I'm just a kid. But Yahweh scolds in the conversation. Don't ever say, I'm just anything. Remember what I told you. I created you. You are special. I chose you not because of any gift or quality you possess. I just chose you. I'm calling you to be who you are, who I created you to be. I'm calling you to be a prophet, to speak my words to all kinds of people, governments, churches, leaders. Now, Jeremiah had heard God calling people to be prophets before. This dialogue in chapter 1 is not unique. God had spoken similar words to famous prophets before him. Remember Moses. I don't know how to speak. Remember Samuel. Isaiah. Woe is me. But Jeremiah had never pictured himself in their company. Jeremiah knew what prophets did. They spoke God's words to God's people. Words that people didn't always want to hear. Words as much about tearing down as about building up. He also knew what happened to prophets. They get stoned. God's call was too big. Jeremiah was afraid of who God was calling him to be. But of course, God knew what Jeremiah was going through. This had been typical of other prophets. And this kind of exchange just adds poignancy to the prophetic office. I'll look after you. I'll look after the itinerary. I know it sounds kind of intimidating, but you don't need to be afraid because I am with you. I will protect you and rescue you whenever you get into trouble. Because it wasn't an if you will get into trouble, it was a when. Stephen Francisco, a former director of the Mennonite Youth Convention some years ago, once said, if it's not too big, it's not God. In other words, it's common to feel inadequate and unprepared. That feeling has a good way of humbling us. to rely on God. God has a way of calling us to things that we think are too big for us, but are never too big for God. God wanted to stretch Jeremiah out of his comfort zone. And God calls all of us to partnership in the divine mission of bringing shalom to all creation. God calls all of us to follow him in radical ways that we may not yet even know. It may be exciting, but it may also be frightening at the same time. And then God does something remarkable. Next slide, please. It says in verse 9 that God reached out his hand and touched Jeremiah's mouth. Obvious metaphor here, but there's something profound in this metaphor. Jeremiah could not be Jeremiah on his own. Jeremiah felt like he had nothing to say. He was too young, and most of all, he's just plain scared. But when God touched him, Jeremiah could be all that God was calling him to be. God's touch was the enabling, the energy, the endurance. A prophet's job is to speak, and so when God touches Jeremiah, God touches him on the mouth. Perhaps a craftsperson would be touched on the hands. And then God says, "Now I have put my words in your mouth." And this gives the rest of the book, which we'll be looking at, divine authority. It says these are not Jeremiah's words, these are divine words. God had created Jeremiah in the first place, and God now empowers him to be all that he was called to be. And then in verse 17, God gives Jeremiah the challenge. Get yourself ready. Stand up. Face your present, face your future, live out your calling, be who I've called you to be, say what I've called you to say. We may not feel qualified to follow God's call on our life, but as we step out in faith and obedience, God provides with that divine touch what we need, and we begin to see how God equips us. Jeremiah's calling was to stand against the whole land. Political leaders, kings and princes, and religious leaders. What a calling. No wonder he was terrified. The chapters that follow give details about how Jeremiah was cursed, threatened, arrested, and despised. The rest of the book of Jeremiah also includes a lot of doubting, complaining, lamenting, even whining about his call. This is why Jeremiah is often known as the weeping prophet. And we will look at Jeremiah's continued dialogue with Yahweh next week. The bottom line is that his calling will not be easy. It will be hard. But with the challenge that God gives Jeremiah, God also gives Jeremiah a new name and a new identity. Initially, Jeremiah seems like a timid and fearful prophet, but God renames him in verse 18, Man of Steel. A fortified city, an iron pillar, a bronze wall. Leaders will oppose him and even fight him, but Jeremiah will overcome. God's message will prevail. For I am with you and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then Jeremiah opens his mouth and speaks. And we have more recorded words from the prophet Jeremiah than any other prophet. Our callings, too, may seem intimidating. The call to follow Christ will often be in opposition to the empire of consumer capitalism all around us. It won't be easy to be faithful to our calling. Other people may think we are crazy sometimes. Jeremiah chapter 1 has often been used as a youth ministry or a young adult text because Jeremiah appears to be a young man when he receives a call from God. But this story is not only a challenge for the young, but for all people, just in case you thought you might be off the hook. God calls all of us, children, youth, young adults, middle age, elders. God calls all of us at whatever stage of life we are at. In a book entitled Calling All Years Good, edited by Kathleen Cahalan, the book provides some wonderful insights what I want to share with you about calling. Children. Children are small. This is perhaps an obvious fact. Physically small. This offers you a perspective on life that everybody else needs. You see the world from a different angle. We need to hear from that perspective down below. For children, everything is new and fresh. Things are experienced for the first time. Adults need to be reminded of these new discoveries. Children, you are more open to new ideas. As a result, adults sometimes get rigid and closed. We need you to help us to be more open and to see things freshly. This is your special calling. Youth. Too often, youth is seen as the stage of life that is just about dreaming about the future. You know, what will you be when you grow up? And these dreams are good, but you also have a calling to live in the present. The calling on youth is to experiment with new things, even though they might be terrifying. For example, dating is not just about finding a life partner in the future. It's about your calling to make friends with people who are different from you. Working at camp or having a part-time job at a restaurant is not just a way to save money for future college. You are living your calling right now by serving others. And you do see into the future, and the rest of us need that perspective when it comes to global issues, like the environment. We need youth to tell us those things. Greta Thunberg is an excellent example. Young adults. This is the stage of life that we usually associate with vocational decision-making. I used to teach an entire course on this, about discerning God's call. And it's true that young adults in their 20s and 30s make major decisions that will affect the rest of their lives. The possibilities of life partners, jobs and careers. Will we have children? And the list goes on. Religious convictions, church involvement. These are all decisions people make in their young adulthood. Young adults are called to passion in the present. In history, most of the martyrs, missionaries, soldiers, and social revolutionaries have all been young adults. The rest of us need your passion for God's reign of shalom. Lead us. Middle age. Now I've got everybody. It is true that it is not true that adults can do whatever they want. Even though middle adults are the most powerful people group on the planet, our calling is to empower others rather than to hoard it for ourselves and our pleasures and advancements. In middle adulthood, people realize they are actually losing their independence. Having a job, having a life partner, having children all require responsibilities. We realize that our lives are interdependent with the lives of our colleagues, friends, partners, and children. The temptation is that jobs, careers, or work become primary to calling, but they are only part of living our calling. I've come to learn this very personally in the past year when my career ended rather suddenly. Who am I now? Elders. Now, the age of 65 is a bit of an artificial marker in our society, but it colors how we think about calling. Now, we may retire from full-time paid work, but we never retire from our calling. Calling is lifelong. In fact, the elderly years, when we are unencumbered by daily responsibilities of family and jobs, might be the time when we can truly live into our calling more than ever. The calling of this stage of life is to leave a legacy, to pass on the stories, to teach and to mentor those who are younger. And so all people are called, regardless of the diversity of age, ethnicity, race, sexuality, marital status, physicality, intellect, or any other aspect of human diversity we can think of. Each of us has a unique contribution from our unique station in life. God has created each one of us in the divine image. God has a calling on each of our lives. God calls all of us out of our comfort zones to be partners in the work that Jesus began. To live with a sense of call from God is profoundly countercultural in our day because our society teaches us to live for ourselves and to do it my way. But this text from Jeremiah challenges all of us to live with a sense of call on our lives, regardless of the age or status. And so I challenge us, who is God calling you to be? What is God calling you to do? What is God saying to you? How are you responding? God touches you and gives you what you need to be who you are called to be and says to you, do not be afraid, for I am with you and I will take care of you. God calls us also to communion. Hope you don't mind my continued Lord of the Rings references. Communion has many layers of meaning. Communion celebrates what God has done for us in Jesus. Taking communion binds us to each other in relationship as siblings in Christ. Today, let's add another layer of meaning. Taking communion means that as you take the bread and the wine, it means you are committing yourself to live out your calling with all that you have and all that you are. And it means that as we take the elements, it means that we recognize Christ's presence with us and among us in all we do. Amen.